All right, today we're going to go through the installation process of Metify MOJO. For those that aren't familiar with Metify MOJO, it's essentially a bare metal provisioning platform, and what it basically does is it goes out and discovers any DMTF compliant Redfish asset within your infrastructure. This can be servers, storage devices, network switches that actually support that. And what it allows you to do is do things like bulk firmware updates, bulk BIOS settings updates for system deployments that may need a very specific and repeated system configuration. It also does OS provisioning for Linux, BSD, Windows, pretty much any operating system that's capable of being Pixie booted or Pixie-less booted. We support both of those. And really the idea is you can prep all the servers in your infrastructure as one turnkey solution for that, one pane of glass that crosses multiple different OEMs. It's Cisco, Supermicro, HPE, pretty much all of them, ASRock, any one of them that supports Redfish, we do a fairly good job supporting. We also support things like storage controller updates. So if you need to go in and create RAID volumes, create VGs, we support that through your standard, ILO, iDRAC, lifecycle controllers, and direct hooks into those RAID cards within those systems, the PERC controllers and so forth. So we support quite a bit of server automation within one platform to the extent you can pretty much do everything in kind of one pane of glass, as you can see here. So what I was going to do is show the installation process, and then in later sessions we can jump into more specific topics. But I really just want to show how easy it is to actually bring this up and get it running within your infrastructure. All right, so we're going to cover a couple different things with prerequisites for MOJO installation. Not a lot there that you really have to do. As far as hardware goes, we're not incredibly specific. It can go onto a bare metal asset. It can go onto a virtual machine. As long as it has 4 cores with a relatively modern processor, that's a requirement. If you have to have at least probably 12 to 16 gigs of RAM is what I'd recommend at a minimum. If you can spare higher amounts, that's great. But I'd say that's bare minimum, especially if you're starting to scale up and you have a lot of nodes you'll be managing within MOJO. And then you want at least, I'd say, between 45 and 65 gigs of disk space, higher if you can spare that, and one network interface. Because essentially what we're going to do in this demo install is we're going to run everything over one network interface for our quick start, right? So in a secure environment, you definitely want to separate those control planes where you have separate VLANs for your Pixie traffic, your BMC traffic, and then your management traffic. But really this particular install is so you can test it. So we make it relatively simple. You just have to have that single network segment. Now, if you do want to do separate VLANs and separate it out, the installer will ask you those questions. You can certainly set up those interfaces, and then you can set it up on discrete networks that correspond to each one of those functionalities that MOJO will be working with. So for me, you can use any hypervisor you want. I'm using Beehive here, which is essentially a free BSD hypervisor. This product's called BVCP. Relatively easy to use, super simple, and very performant. But you can use Proxmox, KVM, Zen, ESXi, whatever the flavor is for you that you want to use, or a bare metal asset. And you really just have to have Debian or Red Hat or any one of the variants underneath those root kind of OS distributions will work just fine, Rocky Linux or anything like that. So let's go ahead and log in, and you'll see here I've got my prerequisites pretty much in place. I've got my one network right here that I'll be using for the all-inclusive traffic, management, Pixie, and then BMC will all travel over this network. It's actually this internal, where is it? The egress network right here is where it will be. And I've got one VLAN effectively associated with that everything will move over. So that's there. And then on storage, you just want to make sure you have enough space here. Here's my root storage. And then I'll show you the virtual machine configuration as it pertains to the MOJO instance that I've set up that we're going to install MOJO on. You'll see it's right here. This is a Debian instance, and I've got the basics in place right here. 16 gigs of memory. I've got 10 cores on it because I can spare that. I've got plenty of processor real estate on this server. And then I've got the Debian ISO attached because that's what I use for the install. And you can see here I've got my hard disk mounted, everything's there, and my network. So I'm pretty much ready to go in this instance. and we can log into it here in just a second. One thing I was going to mention is we do want to make sure that we address the upstream DNS server. You have two options. You can install Mojo with a static address when it asks you what address you're using in the installer, or you can do a host name. And I always recommend the host name because if you're using certificates and you want things to be relatively secure, you definitely want that host name in place. So I always recommend to set up your upstream DNS server with the proper zone. And in this case, you can see this is my zone right here. And then I've got the Mojo A record registered here, and I've got an associated PTR with that, a reverse record. So when the server pings something in here, you do an ICMP request or whatever it is, you'll be able to see all these individual BMCs that are registered, and you'll also be able to work with that corresponding Mojo node within your DNS. Now, one thing I do like, I was going to mention, the Technetium DNS server is super nice because it takes about 5 minutes to bring up. It's fully authoritative. It's got a DHCP server built into it, and it has a ton of options in it in terms of dynamic registrations. It's got ACL capabilities in it. It's very, very robust. So I recommend anybody that might not have a DNS server in place, this is something that they can effectively stand up relatively quick, and you can start to use that with Mojo right away. Now, one other thing I was going to mention here is you'll notice there is A records for my BMCs here. Now, what I've done is, because I move these servers around in the different segments as I'm testing things, I really want to make sure that those IP addresses change that corresponding network segment that I'm moving from VLAN to VLAN to VLAN, right? So the way to do that is set the BMCs to do a DHCP registration, and then on the Technetium DNS server here, I've got it set up for dynamic registrations, so it'll automatically register that. I'll put it into the scope, put an A record in here, and then it'll go in and it'll actually add a PTR as well. So again, very, very nice. Highly recommend taking a look at this. Now, once you have all that in place, go ahead and open up support.metify.io. You'll see a section in here for installing Mojo, and that'll go over the prerequisites as we move forward through the process here. Okay, so let's go ahead and first open up our instance that we installed Debian on, that we'll actually be installing Mojo on. Then we're going to log into that instance. And now that we're there, you'll notice that here we've got some prerequisites, and you can just literally copy and paste these in. There's our first one. Let that run, install JQ, sudo, a bunch of other tools that we'll need as we kind of go through this process. Okay, so we're good there on that first step. We're going to go down to the next step, which is install YQ. Excuse me. There's YQ. Now we're going to go ahead and install Mojo. And you'll notice it's just one simple curl command here, and that's pretty much all it takes to put Mojo in. So let's go ahead and do that. Let me get the right window here. There we go. We're going to go ahead and paste that in there, and that's going to go ahead and start the install. It's going to ask you basic questions. This one is, where do you want to put it? And opt Mojo is the standard installation path. You can change that to whatever you want. Confirms that. You'll notice here it's setting up all the files. And now it's saying we're pretty much ready to go. It's asking about the license agreement. Go ahead and agree with that. It's going to go through and install Docker. So give it just a second to do that. Mojo does run multiple Docker containers inside of this instance, and I'll go over that in a little bit of detail, but you definitely, it's great to have some familiarity with Docker if you're using Mojo. Now, the other one is going to ask you about anonymous telemetry here. This just basically checks it in the license server. If you don't want to do that, you don't want any telemetry passed, you don't want any kind of tracking there in terms of the license status, just go ahead and hit no there, and it's not going to prompt you again for that. Now, what I'm going to do here is put my license in. Go ahead and paste that in there. All right, that looks good. And now it's going to ask me what the license server address is. That's the default. And then it's going to go ahead and identify your available interfaces that you want to use. You just want to make sure the proper network interface that you're using for Mojo is selected here. In this case, it defaulted, which is great. And then it's going to ask you for the actual Mojo host name here. So you just want to make sure that that is accurate. So if I go back in here, I'm just going to go ahead and copy that host name that I have there. And then I'm going to go back into my terminal. I'm going to paste that. And then I'm going to put in the fully qualified name there. And then I'm going to hit enter, and it's going to go ahead and do a check on that. Looks like it's good. Found everything. Now what it's going to do is it's going to confirm the IP address for your Mojo instance. In this case, that is indeed the IP I'm going to be using. It's going to ask me for the network. This is always going to be the same as above, but a 0 on the end there, which means that entire segment. So we're good there. And the net mask, this is going to be a class C. And then it's going to ask for the broadcast. Again, same thing, the network above, but a 255 in the end. And then it's going to ask you for the gateway. So just put your upstream gateway in here. It's going to ask you for the DNS server. There we go. And then it's going to ask if we want to run a DHCP server. Now, this here in the quick start, I always recommend people just select yes here, because what it does, it uses the internal Mojo DNS server, which is basically going to work with the servers, and it's going to ensure that any Pixie traffic, or the OS load an image through Pixie, is going to be done through Mojo's DHCP server. So I always recommend you hit yes here, unless you have your own server and you want to select your own kind of like next boot. Pick another segment or a test segment, or create a new segment that doesn't have a DHCP server that's functionally on it to work with Mojo. Okay, now it's going to ask what range we want in that subnet, right? So we're going to go ahead and put in a base range here of, let's just start it at 160, and then we'll go to, let's say, 180. That'll give us plenty of addresses that we can effectively use. Generates a key, and then it's going to give you a summary, and you'll hit enter. And then it's going to ask you if you have any Active Directory that you want to integrate it with. In this case, no, but we do support full Active Directory integration. There it goes. And everything's looking pretty good. That's basically all it takes to install Mojo. Now what we're going to do is we're going to actually launch the setup. And it's going to go through and create the containers from the registry, build everything, bring Docker up, and then bring Mojo up to a fully functional state. So let's go ahead and do that now. We'll copy this right here. We'll go ahead and paste that in. There we go. Agree to that license. And here we go. This takes a few minutes depending on how fast your system is. You'll see here it's gonna go ahead and load those images in. Yeah, as you can see here, it's moving through it pretty well. We've got the DHCP container, TFTPs in there. We've got our grub builder, database, Redis, consoler, which takes a few minutes. And we're almost to a point where we can start to use the product. All right, we've got the API container that just came up. That's looking good. There's our GUI one. And you can see there. All right, we're looking pretty good here. Now it's asking if we want to install Mojo Live. Now what that is, it's a live disk that we run within our Mojo environment that allows users to attach specific tasks to it. So let's say you have an LSI 3108 card, and you need to flip a mode on it to IR to IT mode or something like that. You want a custom automation in there. The purpose of this Mojo Live is to be able to do tasks like that aren't notoriously supported through Redfish, that can be scripted in a way where a live disk can effectively automate those through tools like MegaRAID CLI and other things like that. So very flexible. I always put that in here. And you can see here, it's going to go ahead and download that and install it. So we'll give it just a second to do that. All right, this is looking pretty good. It's finishing this up. I'll go ahead and extract that and put it into the Mojo instance. By the way, everything it does in here, it does do checksums on everything. So I'll go over that in just a minute. So you know that what's being placed in there is secure and you can always check that. All right, everything looks pretty good. So you'll see here, all the instances there. We've got the commands to stop the platform if we need to. Everything's good. So we'll do a Docker PS here, and we'll go ahead and double check to see what the status is on those containers. Let me just go ahead and get this just a little bit bigger so I can see kind of what's going on here. A little bit easier. Yeah, so it looks good. Everything's up and running. You can see here all the port assignments look good on that Mojo instance. And we should be able to go in here in just a moment and log into the GUI and actually start to use Mojo. All right, all's looking good. Gave it just a couple minutes. Let's go ahead and see if it comes up, and it does. Let's go ahead and accept that. All right, looking good. We'll go ahead and log in with admin. That's our default password in there. And it looks great. I've got a license here that's valid. It shows all the appliance information. I'm up to the latest version on the coordinator, which is the core, kind of Mojo component. It shows the assigned interfaces here for the various networks. And then you'll notice down here on the right-hand side, we've got API endpoints. What's nice about this, you can go into Swagger, and then you can actually see all of the API endpoints here. So if you want to go in and start messing with the API, this is a great place to get started. Everything's well documented in here. And then we also have additional documentations that are in there that are into the normal schema definition, which is, I believe, is just a file that's downloaded. Let's take a look here. Yes, it's a YAML file. You can comb that. And then we also have redoc in there as well that you can open up. And then you can start fishing around and redoc if you want. That gets very, very specific. So these are all great. As we go into the Mojo console, we're pretty much installed. So for all purposes, you can start to manage nodes. Now, in this, like I mentioned, I have a couple Dell and a couple HPE servers that are already on this specific segment. The BMCs already have registrations with the DNS server that I showed you earlier. So what we want to do is essentially go out and see if we can see them. And we start here in nodes and discovery, and there's an authentication profile area right here. Now what we're going to do here is I'm just going to go ahead and put in a node classification here. I'll just put in the lab, and then I'll put in whatever you want to call it here. I'll just do iDRAC and ILO here. Wait for that to add. Very good. I'll edit that. And you'll notice right up here, I've got my username and password. So I'm going to go ahead and put in the Dell one first. Save that. And then I'm going to put in my HP one. I'm going to go ahead and save that. Those two are in there now. So now we have an authentication profile that's going to be used for the registration of the server. We're going to go into scan ranges next here, and you'll notice there's a MOX one in here. This is if you're doing testing against one of our Redfish MOX servers. But for our servers, we're going to go ahead and put in the subnet. And I'm going to go ahead and put in my BMC subnet that I had allocated. In this case, it's 192.168.241. I'm going to start with the first octet, and then I'm going to go to the last, 254, and then I'm going to select 443, which is the secure socket for Redfish on those servers. You can see there it's now added. Now what I want to do here is next I want to scan. Let's see what we can see. So let's do a run discovery, and you'll see here it says scanning. And this can take a couple of minutes on a -24. This is 254 addresses. These can be much larger. I've seen customers that use Class Bs, or they have a list of 50 segments here, in which case you can actually select all of those and you can scan them all at the same time, which is great. So let's see if it's seeing anything over here. It'll take just a second. Oh, there we go. So now you can see here, it's actually seeing all of those individual BMCs. In this case, it got 2 Dells that it found, and it also found an HPE ILO on the network as well. And then it also found my NVIDIA Bluefield 2 BMC, which we're doing a lot of work with right now in the lab. So I'm going to go ahead and select all those minus the NVIDIA one because I'm going to be working with the servers right now. I'm going to go ahead and register, and then I'm going to select that Piney Lab authentication profile that I had here, okay? What that's going to do is it's going to log Mojo into those servers. You can see here it's successfully registered. You're going to see these names flip here in just a second as it starts to introspect that node and finds the exact detail and specification of those servers. There we go. One already flipped to an R250. The Gen 10's there, and we now have an R440 there as well. So what we basically have done here is that process that's notoriously takes a long time. You have to work with multiple teams, total pain. You can now do this 100% through Mojo, and you can discover and start using those assets within literally a period of a few minutes here. Okay, so what do we do with it next? We want to go ahead and assign these servers into a pool, right? Now the pool itself can be anything you want. It can be a wiring closet, it can be a data center, it can be a region, it can be literally anything you want to call it here. So we're going to go ahead and I'm just going to call this my Piney Lab pool, right? And then I'm going to go in and I'm just going to put a description in here. There we go. And then I'm going to assign the all-in-one group because I want this account to do everything on those servers. Now in Mojo, we have very granular policies you can actually attach to a pool through a user or a group. And that's particularly helpful if you have groups of people, you only want them doing firmware updates, or you only want them to do provisioning, or you only want them to be able to see the servers for inventory purposes. You can get very, very granular here. But for the purposes of this demo, I just want to show you that creation of that pool. I'm going to go down to roles, and then I'm just going to show you what that looks like in all-in-one. Okay. And this one, again, I want it to do everything. And you can see here, these predefined policies are pretty much telling us exactly what it's able to do and what it cannot do in this case, right? So we have everything in there. Now that that pool's there, we don't really have any servers in it, okay? So there's two ways of doing this. You can add the servers in manually here by literally placing them into the pool, or you can do it through one of our flavor queries. And that basically allows you to create a profile. You can say, hey, I only want to find servers that have an ILO with firmware version 4.1, and they have to have 32 gigs of memory or higher, right? And then you can do a search, finds those servers, you can place them in the pool. But for this particular instance, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to place these servers in here manually so you can see how it works. We're going to do add resource to pool. I'm going to select all those servers that we just discovered, and then I'm going to go ahead and add them to the pool here. Great, now they're all in there. So if I go up here, perfect. Now I see everything in that pool and it's all registered and everything looks good. It shows me the firmware updates, the BMC versions, the serial numbers, everything is associated with those nodes. And then if I click on those nodes, you'll see here, I've got a list of everything I need. I can edit all these tags to whatever I want. And these can be searchable at any given time through our flavor selection again, which is particularly helpful. And then we also in here have the ability to connect to consoles. Now, this is particularly important if you want to be able to get to the console of the server relatively quick, right? So you do a connect. Takes just a second to get that socket established, find that port. And then it's going to give me a one-time password here. And I love this for security purposes because you're not sitting on some static password. Once the console is closed, deletes that, it's gone. That remote console. Log into that, and it should render a console. And it certainly did. We're good. Now we'll keep that open because we're going to poke around in there in a second here, but the console's open. Now, like I said, what's nice about this is a one-time password. You don't have to worry about that lingering in the BMC. It'll delete it when it's done. Nice, secure, clean way of rendering those consoles. You don't have to go to any other tool. You can do Dell consoles, HP, Cisco consoles directly from Mojo. It makes life much, much easier here. Okay, so now we're good. What I'm going to do is I'm going to log in with that all-in-one account. And all of that looks pretty good. And if we go over here, we're going to notice that there's several new elements here. We're going to go up to servers, and you can see here it shows all of those nodes. Here's my HPE node right here. And for description, I'm just going to put in test server. That looks good. Everything looks good there. And then up here, you'll notice there's a bunch of new things, right? We've got actions where you can change the BIOS settings. So if you have common ones you want to change in here, you can add those. And then you can also create templates and create as many entries as you want here that will actually go in and set very specific BIOS settings. So as an example, if you want SRIOV enabled, right, you would go in here, you'd change that BIOS setting, you'd put in the SRIOV flag there, and then you can apply that. Now that can be done through backend templates to the API as well. This is just directly through the GUI I'm showing here. And then we also have virtual volume that allows you to go in and select a controller. And then on that controller, you can go in and you can literally select specific drives. And part of that process here is you create a RAID 1 and go through and create that virtual volume. And in this case, I'm going to show how to do this. We'll just pick this Debian 12.5 one for now. So if we go back into the CLI right here, and then we go up to the MOJO manage right here, OS images. We want to go ahead and take that. And then we're going to go ahead and run that command in the CLI. Okay. And then it's going to say, do you have your own local OS bundle? Right now, I'm just going to use one that we already have in there. So I'll say no. And then it gives you a nice list here, and it shows all of the Debian instances and everything else that are effectively available through our bundles. In this case, we're going to go and type in Debian, and then we're going to do 12.7 because I want to put bookworm in here. And then the architecture is, of course, going to be x86 64. That's good. And then it gives you the URL to download, which is off this repository. Again, everything's validated and verified. And you can see here it's going in and it's pulling that. So we'll go through that process and I'll show you how the checksums effectively work. Okay, this looks good. So you can see here it extracted the bundle, went through, it validated the checksum, and you can see all the files that extracted them there. And then we're in pretty good shape. Now, the first thing we want to do is go up to the coordinator, and then we're going to go ahead and refresh that, and we'll go back into Provision OS. And now we see Debian 12.7 right there with all the different variants in terms of the the kickstarts. What's nice here is we have the default ones that allow you to get a base Debian install up and running. And you can select either a legacy BIOS LVM, BIOS, or UEFI with UEFI LVM. Now, one of the nice things here is if we go down to, here we go down to provisioning, you'll see here there's a Debian 12.7 that's been added into this menu. And right here, you'll notice that we have all the templates in here. What's nice about this is you can open that up and you can modify the pre-seed in any way, shape, or form you want. So if you have, additional packages or anything like that, you can put all that stuff in here, and you can either modify the ones we have, or you can put your own in here. So very, very flexible from that standpoint. All right, I'm now going to go ahead and just add in a couple more here, just so I have them. You'll also notice ESXi is right up at the top there. So we do actually support deploying hypervisors as well, which is kind of cool. And then we also added a deployment pattern for Proxmox. So if you want to deploy Proxmox through a type 2 type of configuration, meaning that Debian is installed first and then Proxmox goes on top of that, you can select that option, and that will actually deploy a full Proxmox stack to the extent you can log directly into it, the GUI, and start running right off the bat. There's other variants that we've been adding in here that we continuously add to, like Void is one of them. We've got FreeBSD in there now. So if you have FreeBSD you need to put in, you can do that. I'm just going to go ahead and add Ubuntu here really quick because that's one that I use quite often, 24.04.1. That looks good. And we'll go ahead and let that complete. But yeah, that's pretty much it. That's the basics to get a Mojo install up and running. I'll go into more advanced topics, but I at least wanted to cover the basic Mojo install. If you have any questions, feel free to visit support.metify.io. You'll find everything you want to know in there. If you have any questions directly, you can reach out to support@metify.io, and one of us will get back to you and help you through the process if you have any questions. Until next time, thanks. Bye.